If you're going to haunt a place, at least bring something worth listening to. The voice was whispered, half laughing, almost lost in the hush of marble and shadow. But Elias Ward didn't hear it. He wasn't playing for anyone. It was 2:03 a.m. The great hall of the Hawthorne Conservatory was empty, save for the man kneeling beside a rusted janitor's cart. He wore a faded uniform, sleeves rolled just above weathered forearms. A ring of keys jingled softly at his belt as he moved with practiced efficiency until his hands stopped, hovering over the mop handle. Instead, Elias reached into the cart and pulled out a worn leather case. He hesitated. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, casting long, pale reflections across the glossy floor. Outside the glass walls, the city was silent, cold. He opened the case. The violin inside was battered, its varnish worn down to raw wood in some places. One of the fine tuners was missing. The strings weren't new, but Elias held it with the reverence of a father cradling something that had once lived. He tucked the chin rest under his jaw and let the bow hover. Then he played. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was real. Raw, aching, fragile. The first notes wavered, then gained clarity as his fingers remembered the path. A melody soft and haunting rose into the cavernous space. It was not a famous piece, not Bach, not Vivaldi. It was something simpler, something remembered. A lullaby. Halfway through the second refrain, his shoulders trembled, but he didn't stop. Behind the second-floor balcony rail, someone stood motionless. She had entered minutes earlier, shoes clicking softly across marble before she froze, trapped by the sound. Now she gripped the edge of the railing as if letting go might shatter the spell. Isabel Vance hadn't meant to be here. She'd left her meeting with the conservatory board hours ago, restless, frustrated. She didn't believe in ghosts, but this music, it felt like one. The janitor below never looked up. His eyes were closed. The melody floated upward, each note shaped by sorrow, by memory. Isabel's throat constricted before she realized why she was crying. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind with weeps or some, just the slow, disbelieving tears that fall when something cracks in you unexpectedly because a stranger dared to play the truth out loud. Elias reached the final note. It hung in the air like breath on a cold window pane. Then silence. He lowered the bow, tucked the violin back into the case, and limped away. Isabel stepped back. Breath shallow, pulse unsteady. She didn't dare follow. Not yet. The next morning, Elias stood beside the vending machines in the staff hallway, watching the coffee sputter into a paper cup. He looked like he hadn't slept. He rarely did. Morning ward, it was Felix, the building supervisor. Loud, friendly, clueless. Another quiet night of ghost mops and dust bunnies. Elias offered a tight smile. Best company I've had in years. Felix chuckled. You're lucky. I got a dozen violin prodigies upstairs keeping me up past midnight. I swear one of them's practicing Paganini with a meat cleaver. Elias took his coffee and walked away. Meanwhile, across the city, Isabel Vance sat in a corner booth at a quiet cafe, staring at a blinking cursor on her laptop. Her editor wanted a column, a safe one. Profiles of promise, meet Hawthorne's rising stars. She had a list of student bios in her inbox, notes from the dean, a program brochure, but all she could think about was him, the man with the mop and the broken violin. She didn't know his name, didn't know the piece he played, but the sound was still lodged in her chest like a splinter she didn't want removed. Her fingers moved, not toward the notes, but toward a blank page. The janitor who played my soul awake. That was her headline. The column poured out of her in one sitting. It wasn't a review. It wasn't criticism. It was a confession. He didn't play like a student. He didn't play like someone seeking approval. He played like a man remembering a voice he never wanted to forget. She didn't submit it under her name. Not yet. Just a pseudonym. Just a whisper. Back at the conservatory, Elias was scrubbing gum from the underside of a stairwell when Vivian Murray appeared beside him. The founder of the conservatory was 72 and dressed like a retired ballerina turned chess master. Long scarf, sharp gaze, deliberate silence. You missed a spot. Elias looked up, startled. Good morning, Miss Moray. She crouched beside him without asking. Do you ever miss it? He blinked. Miss what? Being heard. Elias didn't answer. His eyes flicked down to the brush in his hand. She stood again with a sigh. You know, some people play to be remembered. Others play because they can't forget. Then she walked away. Elias sat still long after she left, the scrub brush slipping from his hand. That night, something changed. When he entered the lobby at 2:03 a.m., the violin case was already sitting on the bench. Not in the cart, not in the closet. On the bench, waiting. He looked around, empty, still. He picked it up, and once again he played, this time a different melody, slower, softer, tentative. Halfway through, his fingers faltered, and from the darkness above, a voice echoed softly. Only 2 words. Don't stop. His breath caught. He looked up. No one. The lobby was empty, only shadows and silence. He wasn't alone, and for the first time in years, he didn't want to be. The rain came late, soft, uncertain, as if the sky couldn't decide whether it wanted to mourn or just wash the day clean. Isabel Vance sat behind the fogged windshield of her car outside the conservatory, her hands gripping the steering wheel long after the engine had cooled. She hadn't planned to come back. Not tonight, not so soon, but the memory of that melody, the one the janitor played like it had been carved from his ribs, had followed her home like perfume clinging to skin. She hadn't been able to write about the students or the upcoming gala or the board's relentless insistence on reinvigorating the brand. She'd stared at her laptop for hours, deleted every sentence that felt safe. So she came back, not for a story, for a sound. Inside the building, Elias moved quietly like always. His cart rattled slightly as he pushed it past the faculty lounge, past the auditorium doors, to the glass atrium that overlooked the city skyline. Most nights he avoided the more public wings, but tonight felt different. There was a tension inside him he couldn't name, an ache that vibrated against the bones beneath his skin. He thought about the violin on the bench last night, about the whisper from the shadows. Don't stop. He hadn't told anyone, hadn't dared ask. He just played again. And when he did, he'd felt something shift, like a lock he didn't know existed had quietly unlatched. Isabel stepped through the front entrance without a badge, her heels clicking softly against the marble. She didn't try to hide this time. If he was playing, she wanted to see him, but the lobby was empty. No man, no violin, just the echo of her own breath. She wandered toward the atrium, the hem of her trench coat brushing against the polished floor. Then she heard it. Not music, a voice. Elias was talking to himself, or so it would have seemed. He stood near the massive glass window, holding the violin in one hand, bow dangling in the other. He wasn't playing. He was staring out at the rain. I used to think music could keep her here. Like if I played the right song, maybe I could bring her back for just one more night. Isabel froze. She'd sit right there on the rug, pretend conduct me with a plastic straw. Called herself Maestro Clara. A soft laugh escaped him, broken at the edges. I couldn't play at her funeral. Couldn't even touch the damn thing, but some nights, when it's too quiet to breathe, I still hear her. Isabel's voice surprised even herself. Maybe she's still listening. Elias spun around, their eyes met, and for the first time they really saw each other. Not janitor, not critic, just 2 people haunted by sound. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, I was just drawn. Elias's grip on the violin tightened. You again. You remember me? He nodded once. Balcony, Monday night, sharp memory. Music doesn't usually make people cry unless it touches something they thought was buried. She blinked. Is that what it did to you? He looked down. I think I've been buried for years. A long silence stretched between them. Then she asked softly, what happened to her? His jaw flexed. Clara, my daughter. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. The name landed like glass in a quiet room. I'm sorry. Elias gave a nod of thanks. You're right, that caught her off guard. What? He pointed subtly to her leather bag, the notepad, the journalist badge. The way you watch people like you're collecting pieces for later. Occupational hazard. Your column, the anonymous one. That was you. She hesitated. You read it? I don't usually read much anymore, but someone printed it and left it in my locker. A beat. Clara's locker. He added, barely audible. Something pulled tight in her chest. I didn't write it for exposure. I didn't even put my name on it. That's how I knew it was real. They sat across from each other in the empty atrium lounge, the city lights glowing behind them like an orchestra waiting to begin. Elias rested the violin on his lap. Isabel studied the scratches on its body. You ever fix it? I've tried, but some things are meant to stay cracked. I used to play. Piano, Carnegie Prep, trophies, scholarships, the whole thing. He arched an eyebrow. Used to, she didn't answer right away. My sister, she was better than me. Violinist, brilliant, brave. She swallowed hard. She died on stage. A seizure mid-performance. I watched it happen from the wings. The air went still. After that, I couldn't touch the keys. Felt like the music betrayed us. Elias looked at her, and for the first time there was no mask on his face. Just honesty. You and I, we've both been holding funerals every time we open our mouths. She let out a quiet breath. So why do you still play? He considered the question, then answered with a voice barely above a whisper. Because if I don't, she disappears. They sat in silence for several minutes. Not awkward, not forced, just real. Finally, Isabel stood. I'd like to hear you play again. Elias looked up. Why? Because I need to remember what it feels like when something is true. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. She took that as enough. As she walked away, Elias picked up the violin again, and from behind her the music returned. Not perfect, but honest, and for the first time in a long time, Isabel didn't feel like she was running from ghosts. She was walking towards something. Something that sounded a lot like healing. Elias didn't come in through the front doors that night. He entered through the side loading dock where the snowdrift was shallow and the light was broken. His boots crunched on salt pellets as he moved past the dumpsters and into the hallway like a shadow folding into itself. Tonight felt heavier. He hadn't played in 2 days. Not since that night with Isabel. Not since he saw her eyes soften in the dim glow of the atrium as if his sorrow had mirrored her own. He didn't know what to do with that kind of reflection. The locker room was empty, just how he liked it. A row of dented gray lockers, a flickering overhead bulb, and the quiet drip of a sink that hadn't stopped leaking since October. He opened locker number 17. Inside, on the back wall, taped with yellowing corners, was a child's drawing. Crayon on faded construction paper. A stick figure man holding a violin beside a little girl with a wild swirl of yellow hair, both standing under a crooked rainbow. Above them, in careful block letters, me and Daddy, we sing even when it rains. Clara. Elias stared at it the way a man might stare into the ocean, knowing if he stepped any closer, it would pull him under. He sat down on the bench, elbows on knees, hands clasped so tightly they shook. Sometimes grief didn't shout. Sometimes it just sat beside you in a room and waited for you to speak first. Vivian Morey entered without knocking. She never did. Still here, Mr. Ward. More observation than greeting. Elias didn't look up. Depends how you define here. Vivian stepped closer. I heard you played again. He gave a quiet nod. She heard you too. He turned. Who? Vivian didn't answer. Instead, she leaned against the locker beside his. I saw you once before all this. You were playing at a hospital fundraiser. Clara was about 5. She kept tugging your sleeve between phrases, trying to get your attention. Elias allowed a faint smile. She wanted me to play Twinkle in the middle of Bach. She didn't care about Bach. She cared about you. Elias's expression dimmed again. You never asked why I hired you, a man with a Juilliard background cleaning baseboards. I could have hired 10 others. I didn't want favors. You didn't get one. You got a second chance you weren't ready for. But I think you're getting close. He looked up. Close to what? To forgiving yourself. Isabel stood in the music library, flipping through old concert programs she wasn't really reading. Her phone buzzed beside her, a text from her editor. Where are you with the conservatory profiles? You're 2 days past deadline. Need the next piece today. She silenced it. Then her eyes caught a photo on one of the pages. It was a charity concert poster. Hawthorne Winter Gala featuring Elias Ward, violin. The date, 6 years ago. The same name, same face, except smiling, unburdened, his arms around a little girl whose blonde curls looked like rays of sunlight. Clara. Isabel's fingers hovered over the image. Then she whispered to herself, you weren't always the ghost. Later that night, Elias walked into the atrium. The lights were low. He hadn't brought the violin. But on the bench, exactly where it had been left before, sat a small envelope. No name. He picked it up. Inside was a page torn from a notepad, folded neatly. He unfolded it slowly. Play it again. The one that breaks hearts. I think mine's ready now. He stared at it for a long time, heart thudding with something that wasn't quite fear and not yet hope. Then, as if led by an unseen current, he turned and walked back to the locker room. He opened locker number 17, reached past Clara's drawing, pulled out the case. He carried it like a prayer back to the atrium. And this time when he played, he didn't close his eyes. Isabel heard it from the hallway. She didn't enter. Not yet. She leaned against the wall, hand resting over her chest as if to keep her heart from breaking in half. The melody was different this time. Fuller, stronger, still aching, but with a quiet courage beneath every note. He's not playing just for her anymore, she realized. He's playing to be heard. After the last note faded, Elias lowered the bow slowly, and then he saw her standing in the corridor beyond the glass doors, arms folded, hair damp from the snow. You came back. I never left. I just didn't know where to sit. He opened the door and let her in. They sat side by side on the atrium bench. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Isabel asked, "Did Clara ever hear you play that song?" "No, I wrote it the night after she died. I couldn't play it until now." She nodded. "Then maybe she's hearing it now." Elias looked at her, eyes red but clear. "I hope so because for the first time I'm not playing to remember her." He paused. "I'm playing so she'll know I'm still becoming the man she believed I was." Isabel's breath caught, and in that moment, without a single tear falling, the two of them sat in a grief so shared it didn't feel like sorrow anymore. It felt like something sacred. The thing about grief is if you don't speak it, it starts speaking for you, Mo. In Elias Ward's case, it spoke through a broom. Each morning at Hawthorne Conservatory, as students in pressed uniforms carried violins and cello cases past him without eye contact, Elias pushed the broom like a priest swinging incense. Slowly, deliberately, with a kind of reverence no one understood. No one but her. Isabel Vance stood just beyond the glass doors of the main studio, arms crossed, watching Elias sweep the marbled hallway with the same quiet focus he brought to a violin bow. She hadn't meant to come back 3 days in a row, but here she was again, drawn to a man who didn't speak unless it mattered, and played music like it was a language the world had forgotten. "You know, you sweep floors the same way you play, like it might save somebody." Elias didn't stop moving. "Sometimes it does." She tilted her head. "Save who?" He looked up, met her eyes. "Me." The honesty landed like a stone in her chest. "You ever feel like the world handed you sheet music for a life you didn't sign up to perform?" Elias leaned on the broom handle, every day since she died. Isabel nodded. "For me, it was the day my sister collapsed on stage." She stepped closer. "Eleanor was everything I wasn't. Daring, loud, brilliant. And then, silence." Elias didn't say anything. "You know what the worst part was? I didn't cry. Not at the funeral, not at the hospital. I just shut off like a piano with every key glued down. You shut down because if you let one tear out, the whole damn symphony might start." She blinked, caught off guard. "Exactly." Elias nodded toward the hallway. "Walk with me." They walked slowly past practice rooms, echoing with arpeggios and timid scales. Students passed them without notice. Two ghosts in a temple of performance. "You still play?" Isabel shook her head. "Haven't touched a piano in 10 years. Why me?" She hesitated. "Because every time I sat down, I heard her." He looked over, and now she sighed. "Now I think maybe I want to hear her again. Just not alone." They reached the end of the hallway where the old chapel had been converted into a storage space. Elias stopped in front of a double door and pulled out a key. "Come on, I want to show you something." Inside was a mess. Dusty chairs, broken music stands, crates labeled, "Do not use." But tucked in the back corner was something unexpected. A baby grand piano, its legs scratched, its keys slightly yellowed. "You kept this here?" It was Clara's favorite. Said it had a warmer sound, like it remembered people. Isabel moved toward it as if approaching an old friend she thought had died. She ran her fingers across the lid. Elias watched her, not rushing. Finally she sat. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembled. She pressed one, just one. It echoed through the room like a memory returning home. Elias knelt beside a nearby crate and opened the battered violin case. The scent of rosin and old wood filled the air. He stood, and without a word they began to play. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The melody they built was slow, cautious, her left hand testing simple chords, his bow finding breath between hesitation. And then something shifted. Their griefs began to speak to each other. Her sadness shaped the structure. His loss gave it color. By the time the last note faded, they weren't crying, but neither could quite breathe. Isabel turned to him. That wasn't a duet. That was confession. Elias smiled barely. Then I guess you're the first person I've confessed to in years. She stood slowly. You're not just a janitor, Elias. I never was. But it was easier to disappear if I pretended I was. Later that day, Isabel sat in her hotel room, staring at her laptop again. The cursor blinked like it had something to say. This time she let it speak. Ghosts don't always wear white sheets or rattle chains. Some of them push mops. Some of them play music so quietly you only hear it if your own soul has gone quiet too. She stopped, reread the line. Then she added, his name is Elias Ward, and if music has saints, he might be one of them. She didn't send it, not yet. Some truths deserve to be held a little longer before being shared with the world. That evening, Elias returned to the storage room alone. He didn't play. He sat beside the piano, hands folded, and then he whispered as if to someone invisible. Clara, maybe I was never silent. I just forgot what my voice sounded like. The room didn't answer, but for the first time in a very long while, Elias didn't feel like he was talking to a ghost. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was being heard. If I fall off this roof, tell them it was your idea. Isabel's voice broke the stillness like a laugh in a church, half joking, half nervous, entirely alive. Elias didn't look back. He stood at the edge of the rooftop of the conservatory, hands in the pockets of his faded jacket, gazing out over the city as snow began to whisper down in delicate spirals. He'd left the rooftop door unlocked that night, knowing, hoping she might follow. You'll be fine. Fear of heights only counts if you plan on falling. Very comforting, she muttered, stepping fully onto the gravel, pulling her coat tighter. What are we doing up here? He didn't answer right away. The skyline stretched before them in sharp silhouettes and golden windows. The distant hum of traffic below sounded like an orchestra tuning before the first note. Elias finally turned to her, eyes thoughtful. Up here, you can hear your own silence. Isabel raised an eyebrow. I don't usually enjoy being alone with my silence. Elias nodded. Most people don't. It says things we work hard to drown out. She folded her arms. And what does yours say? He turned back to the city. That I'm not finished yet. They stood in quiet for a moment that held more than words could. Then Elias took the worn violin case from beside the wall, opened it, tuned it by ear. No stage lights, no warm-up, just cold fingers and a slow breath. He began to play, not for anyone, not even for Clara. This time he played for himself. The melody wasn't loud or showy. It moved with restraint, like a memory reintroduced slowly so it wouldn't break him again. It was written in a minor key, but it wasn't mournful. It searched. Every note felt like a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Isabel watched him, not blinking. The way his face changed mid-phrase. The way he tilted the violin ever so slightly at the crescendo, as if coaxing it not just to sound, but to speak. I never understood how someone could play sorrow into a room. But you don't just play it, you translate it. Elias didn't stop playing, so she walked closer, and without asking, she sat beside him on the ledge. Their shoulders didn't touch, but the nearness felt like a dialogue. When the last note died, neither moved. You know, this would be a beautiful story, Elias smirked. What? Depressed janitor plays violin on rooftop with emotionally unavailable journalist? More like two ghosts who stopped pretending to be alive and started trying. Elias exhaled slow. Trying's the hard part, the only part. She replied. He turned to her. Why do you really keep coming back? She met his eyes. Because you're the first sound I've heard in 10 years that didn't feel like noise. The words weren't romantic. They were real. Elias looked down at the violin, then at her, and before he could stop himself, he asked, Do you miss her? Isabel didn't ask who he meant. Yes, every day, and not just the big things. I miss how she used to correct my posture when I played piano. I miss the way she rolled her eyes when I got sentimental. She paused. I miss being needed. Elias's gaze drifted. That's what grief doesn't tell you. That it's not just loss, it's loneliness with a name. A gust of wind kicked snow across the roof. Isabel shivered. Elias noticed. He stood and shrugged off his coat, placing it around her shoulders. I'm not fragile. I know. But you're allowed to be cold. She smiled. You're infuriatingly gentle. You know that? He chuckled. Takes practice. There was something in the air now. An ache, yes, but one that vibrated with potential, as if the night were holding its breath for something. You ever think about playing again? On stage? Elias shook his head. Not in a place where people clap. Why not? Because I'm not ready for applause. I'm just now learning how to stop hiding. She studied him. You don't hide when you play. That's the only time I don't. They sat in silence again, but this one felt earned. Finally, Elias stood and looked toward the stairwell. Come on, before you catch pneumonia and I end up getting sued. Isabel stood too. What if I told you I'd like to hear that piece again? Maybe somewhere warm next time. Elias nodded. Maybe. As they walked down the narrow staircase, their footsteps echoed like a soft coda to a rooftop symphony. Before she disappeared down her hallway, she turned back. Elias? He looked up. Do you ever wonder if music can be the beginning after the end? He considered it. I think music is the beginning. The silence just teaches us how to listen. Back in the empty atrium under the same dim lights where it had all started, Elias stood alone. He looked at the violin, then at the empty bench. He didn't sit. He just whispered, "Thank you, Clara, for making sure I wasn't the only one listening." Then slowly, quietly, he began to play again. This time not for her, not for himself, but for whoever still believed that broken things could still carry beautiful sound. The snow had turned to sleet by morning, harsh, wet, undecided. It tapped against the windows of the conservatory like fingers too impatient to knock. Inside the administrative archives, Isabel Vance stood in a room most people forgot existed. Shelves of dusty programs, grant applications, donor logs, and concert records lined the walls like a library abandoned by time. The air smelled of old paper and furniture polish. She wasn't supposed to be here, but something had been pulling at her since that night on the roof. The music, the silence after, and the look on Elias's face when he said, "I think I'm not finished yet." She was looking for answers. Instead, she found a name. It started with a box labeled Winter Gala 2017. She flipped through photo inserts and seating charts until she spotted a handwritten donor card tucked between pages. Her fingers froze. Scholarship inquiry. Ward, Clara, age 5, daughter of Elias Ward. Talent, early development violin. Recommendation, Julian Vance. Her own last name, her own father's signature. Isabel stared at the page like it might disappear if she blinked. It didn't. She stormed out of the archives with the paper clutched in her coat pocket and fury burning like static under her skin. The next call wasn't to her editor. It was to her father. Julian Vance answered on the third ring, his voice polished and clipped as ever. "Isabel, I was just thinking about you. Have you finished your profile series? The conservatory board has said they haven't seen anything published yet. Dad, why is your name on a scholarship letter for Elias Ward's daughter?" There was silence on the other end. Then, "That's not something I thought you'd ever see. But it's true?" Julian sighed. "Yes, years ago, before the accident, I offered Elias Ward a full scholarship for his daughter. Private tutoring, future placement, even a potential debut under the foundation's name. And he declined. He said he didn't want his daughter growing up as someone else's story." "That sounds like him," Julian continued. "The problem was I'd already made arrangements. I'd promised donors her debut. When he backed out, everything unraveled. And then the fire happened." Julian's tone cooled. "Unrelated." "Was it?" Isabel asked, her voice low. Julian said nothing. "You used a little girl as a pitch deck, and when her father wouldn't sell her off, you made sure he'd never get another invitation." "She died, Isabel," he said sharply. "That wasn't on me. But what came after was, he disappeared, took a mop, gave up music." Julian exhaled. That man chose silence. That wasn't my doing. Isabel's voice broke. Maybe, but you made sure the world wouldn't listen if he ever spoke again. Back at the conservatory, Elias stood in the courtyard, brushing slush from the walkway. Vivian Moray approached, her cane tapping gently on the stone path. I saw her. Who? Isabel in the archives. Elias straightened, looking wary. Finding what? Vivian's gaze softened, a thread she didn't know existed. Sometimes healing leads us into the attic. I'm not sure I want anything she might find, Elias said. Vivian smiled gently. She's not digging for your pain, Elias. She's digging for the part of you forgot how to believe in. He paused. What if it's gone? It's not. It's just buried under the dust of survival. That night, Isabel stood outside the janitor's locker room, a folder in her hands. She didn't knock, just waited. Elias emerged a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a cloth. Their eyes met. She handed him the folder. You should see this. He opened it, read the letter, froze. The silence between them stretched like glass. Why now? Because if you're going to keep playing, you deserve to know what you were fighting against. He looked up. I wasn't fighting. You were running. And maybe now you don't have to. Elias closed the folder. Do you believe in fate? No, but I believe in choice, and this time you get to choose how your story ends. He studied her face and for the first time let the truth rise up inside him without pushing it down. She died believing music was magic, and I let it become a curse. No, Isabel said softly, you let it go silent. That's not the same as giving up. That's grief. He swallowed hard, then finally whispered, I want to play again. Not just at night, not just when no one's watching. She stepped closer. Then I'll help you make them listen. Later that evening, Elias stood in the same hallway where students often passed him by. Only this time, he carried the violin case in plain sight. He didn't flinch when they looked, didn't shrink. He moved like a man reclaiming something that had once been stolen. Not just his name, but the music inside it. They say grief comes in waves, but Elias Ward had lived long enough to know that sometimes it crashes like a flood. It started innocently enough. The conservatory was hosting a donor luncheon in the upper gallery, a tradition Elias typically avoided by scheduling his duties far from the catered smiles and polished pleasantries. But this time, Felix, the ever-cheerful supervisor, had twisted his arm. We're short on hands, just set up some extra chairs near the piano. No big deal. Elias had nodded, too tired to argue. He didn't expect him to be there. Julian Vance stood near the buffet table, a whiskey in hand and a diamond watch glinting beneath his tailored cuff. His laugh, deep, calculated, hollow, was unmistakable. Elias froze mid-step. His throat dried, his knees nearly buckled, but he kept walking, set the last chair in place, tried to vanish. But Julian saw him and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that remembers how it felt to win. Ward, he said loudly, as if recalling an old joke, still pushing chairs instead of sonatas. The room quieted a notch. Just enough. Elias straightened. Still cashing checks off other people's talent? Julian's smile tightened. You always were a difficult man, but I'll give you credit. You know how to hold a grudge. This isn't a grudge, it's a memory. A poor one, clearly. Julian sneered. I offered your daughter a future. You turned it into an epitaph. The words landed like a slab. Elias saw white. His hand clenched into a fist before he knew what it meant to do. For a second, just a second, every ounce of pain he'd buried screamed to rise. But then a voice behind him. Elias. Isabel standing just outside the archway. Eyes wide, breath held. He lowered his hand. Julian looked between them, laughed. Well, I see the journalist inherited your taste for damaged things. Isabel stepped forward and slapped him. The sound echoed through the marble like a cymbal crash. You lost the right to call yourself my father the moment you turned a grieving man into your scapegoat. Now get out of his way. Julian stared at her, then at Elias. Then, like every coward cloaked in power, he turned and walked out without a word. Elias left the event minutes later, not waiting for applause or apologies. He found himself in the old music room, the one with Clara's favorite piano. His hands trembled as he reached for the violin, but when he lifted the bow, his fingers wouldn't move. He stared at the strings, at the scuffs on the wood, at the place where Clara once put stickers of stars and hearts to make Daddy's violin pretty again. And he cracked. He dropped the instrument, sank to the floor, and wept. The kind of weeping that steals the breath, that splits the ribs, that makes you beg the ceiling for answers you no longer expect. I was just trying to protect her, he whispered to the floor. I didn't want her to be used. I didn't want her to become them. But the silence only answered with ache. He stayed curled there for a long time, the violin untouched, the song unplayed. That evening, Isabel found him sitting on the conservatory steps, staring out at the empty courtyard. Snow falling again, just enough to coat the stone-like memory. She sat beside him, didn't speak. After a moment, he said, "He blamed me. He's wrong. But what if he's not?" Elias's voice was raw. "What if she could have lived a bigger life if I'd said yes?" Isabel looked at him, not with pity, with knowing. My sister got everything she ever wanted. Competitions, spotlights, critics who used words like prodigy and once in a generation. And in the end, none of it saved her. Elias closed his eyes. "I don't know how to carry it anymore," he whispered. "You don't carry it. You play it. That's the only way it gets out." He looked at her, and for the first time in days, something in his expression softened. Not healed, but cracked just enough for the light to start seeping in again. The next morning, Elias didn't open his locker. He didn't carry the violin. He went to work, cleaned quietly, nodded to Felix, repaired a cracked tile outside the recital room, and when the day ended, he walked home alone. But on his kitchen table, beside an unopened letter from the utilities company, sat a note, his handwriting. Years old. It read, "If you ever stop playing, she disappears." He stared at the paper, then at the violin case beside it, and slowly reached for the latch. Elias didn't believe in signs. Not anymore. But the moment his fingers touched the edge of that old letter, creased, yellowed, hidden behind a lining in the locker he'd opened every day for years, something in the air shifted. The envelope was addressed in Clara's handwriting. Tiny looping script that still carried the innocence of childhood, but had begun to reach for maturity. She had tucked it away where she knew he'd find it. One day, his knees weakened. He sat on the bench, hard hammering, the world around him muffled like he was underwater. He opened it with trembling fingers. "Dear Dad, I know you'll find this after I'm gone. Not gone, gone. I mean, like one of those days you're tired or sad and open your locker and think of me. I just wanted to say something. You think I didn't notice, but I did. Every sacrifice, every skipped dinner, every tear you never let fall. I know you gave up the stage for me. You gave up everything, but you have to stop giving up now, because if you stop playing, then I disappear." The rest was smudged with what he could only assume were her tears, or maybe his own. It didn't matter because at that moment, Elias Ward knew something with devastating clarity. He hadn't just buried Clara's music. He had buried himself, and it was time to come back. That evening, the conservatory hall was empty. Echoes of daylight still clung to the high windows, casting amber shadows across the polished floor. Elias wheeled in the old upright piano from the back closet. Not the Steinway, not the stage-worthy grand, just the one with the worn ivory keys Clara used to press with sticky fingers after lunch. He placed his violin case on the bench, opened it slowly. This time he didn't hesitate. The bow met the strings, and the first note trembled through the air, like a soul finding its voice after years of silence. He didn't play one of Clara's old recital pieces. He didn't reach for anything classical or recognizable. He just played from pain, from memory, from that fragile space between grief and grace. Each note was a letter unread, each phrase a conversation never finished, each crescendo a plea. Please don't forget her. And somehow, in the ache of melody, he felt Clara again. Not as a ghost, as breath. Outside the hall, someone was listening. Isabel hadn't meant to come. She told herself she needed to drop off a file to Felix. That was the excuse. But the truth was simpler. She missed Elias. Not in the obvious way, not with flowers and flutters. She missed the way he looked at a music stand like it held the answer to the universe. She missed the way he listened more than he spoke. And she missed the ache in his silence because it matched her own. So when she heard the music drifting from the conservatory doors, she froze. The sound was raw, beautiful, imperfect, human. She pressed her palm to the glass and cried. The next day, Elias left a folded note on Felix's desk. "I'd like to submit a composition for the student spring concert." Felix read it 3 times, blinked, looked toward the hallway where Elias had just quietly disappeared. Then he smiled and whispered, "About damn time, so." Weeks passed in quiet diligence. Elias wrote, rewrote, scratched entire staves only to rebuild them with the stubborn patience of a man stitching a wound from the inside out. Isabel watched from a respectful distance. Sometimes she'd bring him coffee and ask nothing. Other times she'd sit beside him at the rehearsal room piano, letting her fingers dance beside his in silence. One evening she broke it. "You know, I spent so long chasing perfection in others' music, I forgot how flawed beauty really is." Elias glanced sideways. Maybe perfection was never the goal. "Then what is?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "To be heard, really heard." She nodded. "I hear you." Those 3 words, spoken without expectation or condition, landed deeper than she knew. On the night of the spring concert, Elias didn't wear a tux. He wore his janitor uniform. Pressed clean, sleeves rolled. He stood backstage holding the violin like it was alive in his hands again. Isabel walked over holding a small velvet box. "Clara would have wanted you to have this." Inside was a pin, a tiny silver clef polished to a soft gleam. "She got it for you after your first cleaning shift here. If they won't see the music in you, then she would." He pinned it to his collar without a word. Then he stepped onto the stage. The room quieted. There was no fanfare, no announcement, just a man, a violin, and the hush of expectation. And then he played. The piece was called "The Notes We Leave Behind." It wasn't complicated, but it was honest. It held sorrow, but didn't drown in it. It held memory, but reached for tomorrow. And somewhere between the bridges and the fall of each measure, there was forgiveness. He finished, and for a moment no one moved. Then the first person stood, then another, until the room was on its feet, not for the skill, but for the courage. Backstage, Elias sat alone, wiping the bridge of the violin. Isabel appeared beside him. He looked up. She would have laughed at all the wrong notes. She would have danced anyway. Isabel said, sitting beside him. They didn't speak for a while. Then Elias turned to her. "You ever think music doesn't heal? I think healing isn't about erasing the pain. It's about turning it into something that can be shared." He looked at her, at the eyes that had seen too much and still chose softness. And he said, "Stay." She didn't ask for how long, she just took his hand. The conservatory's great hall hadn't buzzed with this much anticipation in years. Velvet seats filled row by row. Chandeliers hummed with golden light, casting their soft glow over the audience. Patrons, critics, students, skeptics. On stage, a grand Steinway waited silently, its lid raised like a question. A single spotlight hung above, still dimmed, and somewhere backstage, a man who used to mop this very floor was steadying hands that hadn't touched a violin in weeks. Vivian stood near the wings, heart thumping beneath her paisley scarf. "Please don't leave me hanging, Elias," she whispered to no one. A hush fell. The house lights dimmed. The MC took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, before our showcase concludes, the faculty would like to present something unexpected." A ripple of murmurs. From the far right of the stage, under no fanfare, Elias Ward stepped into the light. He looked smaller than expected, not frail, just real. No tuxedo, no polished shoes, just a simple black shirt, sleeves rolled up, and a repaired violin in hand. The spotlight found him. So did the silence. Somewhere in the second row, a young girl whispered, "Isn't that the janitor?" Another answered, "Shh, that's him, the one from the article." Elias didn't speak. He just adjusted the violin beneath his chin, and for one breathless moment, everything held still. Then came the first note, soft, raw, not perfect, but alive. And then another sound, a second voice, not from the violin. From the far side of the stage, Isabel Vance stepped out in a long navy dress. Her hands hovered above the Steinway, uncertain. Gasps echoed. Some recognized her immediately. Others just felt the tension of someone reclaiming something lost. She didn't glance at Elias, but she didn't need to. He nodded once, as if to say, "Now." Together they began, a simple, aching duet. Not flashy, not fast, just honest. notes layered like memory. One voice reaching, the other grounding. Her piano wrapped around his melody like arms around a child. Somewhere in the back, Vivian clutched the edge of the curtain, tears already breaking free. The hall disappeared. The world narrowed to two people on a stage, two souls who had lost everything and were finding each other in music. Midway through the piece, Elias closed his eyes and saw Clara, not in smoke, not in ashes, but in light. She was sitting cross-legged on the wooden floor of their old apartment, cradling her toy violin, swaying to his playing. Her lips moved with words only he could hear. "Play it for them, Dad. Not because you have to, because you can." He didn't miss a note. Isabel, meanwhile, kept her gaze locked on the keys, but her mind was on her sister. Eleanor's last performance had ended in chaos. Isabel hadn't touched a piano since, but now she felt Eleanor in the pauses, in the rests, in every gentle decrescendo, and for the first time in years, the grief didn't crush her. It lifted. When the final note hung in the air, neither of them moved. Silence, full and sacred, held the room, and then applause, thunderous, standing. A wave of sound that crashed down and rose again like the sea. Some cried, some just stood, hands trembling. A woman in the front row whispered to her husband, "I don't know what I just heard, but I felt it." Backstage, Julian Vance stood frozen behind the curtain. He had come to see the show expecting to gloat at Elias's absence. Instead, he witnessed something no amount of money could orchestrate. His daughter, radiant, playing for love, not legacy, and the man he once looked down on, commanding a crowd without a word. Julian stepped back into the shadows. On stage, Elias gave the faintest bow. His eyes met Isabel's, no smile, just acknowledgement. Something had shifted. They left the stage together. Backstage, breathless and flushed, Isabel leaned against the wall. "You didn't miss a beat." Elias shook his head. "I didn't play it for them." She looked up. "Then who?" He met her gaze, voice quiet but clear. "For Clara and for the girl who stopped playing because she thought silence was safer." Her eyes shimmered and she whispered, "It was until now." Vivian appeared. Wiping her cheeks with a handkerchief she pretended not to need. "If I die tonight, bury me right here in the orchestra pit. I've lived enough." Isabel laughed, breathless. Elias's lips curved, the closest thing to a smile anyone had seen from him since before. Vivian squeezed their hands. "You both brought the roof down, but more than that, you brought the music home." The three of them stood there for a beat. Then Isabel turned to Elias. "There's a park. Clara loved it, didn't she?" His eyes widened. "How did you—" "I read everything she left behind. Vivian gave me copies. I'd like to go there with you, just to sit. No violins, no pianos, just silence. The good kind." He nodded. "I'd like that." The applause had faded. The stage was dark, but something had shifted permanently in both their lives, not with noise, but with stillness. Late that night, the city lay quiet beneath a blanket of misty streetlight. Elias and Isabel sat side by side on a bench in Greystone Park, Clara's favorite. A gentle wind whispered through the trees, rustling the swing-set chains in the distance. No cameras, no audience. Just them and the kind of silence that feels earned. "I used to bring her here after her lessons," Elias said, his voice low, rough from emotion. "She'd always climb that crooked slide and pretend it was a pirate ship. She'd yell, 'Full sail, Dad!' like she was conquering the world." Isabel smiled softly. "And you? I'd sit right here. Same bench. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and listen to her laugh. That laugh, it healed more than music ever could." A pause, going, "You never told me how it happened," Isabel said gently. Elias stared ahead. "It was a fire, old wiring in the building. I was at work. She was home alone for just an hour." 1 hour, his jaw clenched. She was always drawing, always making up stories. The firefighter said she'd crawled under the piano, as if maybe she thought it would protect her. Isabel didn't speak. She just reached over and took his hand. For once, he didn't pull away. "She'd be proud of you," she whispered. "No, she'd be proud of us." That duet, it wasn't just music. It was permission for both of us. Isabel's gaze dropped. She hesitated. "There's something I need to tell you." Elias turned toward her, sensing the change in her voice. My father, Julian. His face darkened. He, she swallowed. He's the one who offered to sponsor Clara years ago. I found a letter in Vivian's office. Elias's body stiffened. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve the truth. And because I didn't know not until recently. But I couldn't stand on that stage tonight and not be honest with you. Elias stood up, breathing hard. Your father looked me in the eye and said my daughter didn't have to die, that I should have taken his deal like some bargain. I know, she said, rising too. And I'm not him, Elias. I walked away from all that. Elias paced in a slow circle, fists clenched, then stopped. What was the deal? He wanted to sponsor Clara's musical future, conservatory tuition, national tour. On one condition, let me guess, that I walk away, give her up so he could own her story. Isabel nodded. You said no because you didn't want her growing up thinking music was just currency, that it had to be bought, sold, branded. You chose integrity over opportunity. I chose her. Every damn time. Silence fell between them. I walked away from my father too, Elias, she said finally. Tonight, after the performance, he offered me the editor-in-chief role at the Conservatory Voice. Full creative control, international reach, everything I've worked for. Elias raised an eyebrow. You're telling me this because I said no. He blinked. I told him I'm done writing about other people's music. From now on, I want to create it, even if it's in small halls, even if it's just one student at a time. I'd rather sit in a room full of kids who believe in sound than in a boardroom full of men who don't believe in anything. Elias stared at her, not with surprise, but with something closer to admiration. I thought you were polished marble. Turns out you're clay and fire. Isabel tilted her head. That's either an insult or the most poetic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'll take the risk. They both laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. She looked at him carefully. What now, Elias? Where do we go from here? He took a long breath, and this time he looked lighter, not fixed, not whole, but no longer broken beyond repair. I've been thinking about Clara's last drawing, the one I kept behind the mop closet, the one with the little music school. She nodded. She titled it The Clara Project. Said she wanted to teach music to kids who couldn't afford lessons, so they know what joy sounds like even when life gets loud. Isabel's eyes welled. She said that? She wrote it in crayon. Misspelled half of it, but the message was perfect. Isabel placed a hand over his heart. Then let's do it. Let's build it. He blinked. You're serious? I walked away from legacy. Now I want to help build one that actually matters. Elias exhaled. Vivian won't let us use the basement, no? Oh, she will. Trust me. That woman's been orchestrating this whole thing since the first night she saw you play. They both turned toward the playground again. In the distance, a little girl twirled in slow circles beneath the street lamp, humming a tune neither of them recognized, but both of them felt. Elias whispered, I thought I was saving the music, but the music was saving me. Isabel reached for his hand again. You saved each other. They stood in silence, letting the night fall gently around them. Not everything had been said, not everything had healed, but for the first time, they weren't running. They were staying, choosing together. In the morning, Elias found a message from Vivian asking him to meet her in her office. She sat behind a desk crowded with awards and framed photos, her scarf a shock of purple against the mahogany paneling. When he entered, she didn't look up from the paper she was signing. Shut the door, Mr. Ward. He did. You know why I asked you here? He waited. I need to fire you. He stiffened. Then he noticed a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. I can't very well have my new artist-in-residence mopping floors. Can I? Elias blinked. I don't understand. Yes, you do. You've just forgotten how to hear good news. Vivian slid a folder across the desk. The board has approved a limited residency, 6 months, 2 recitals, and a special project of your choosing. Room B14 is being cleared as we speak. The old practice room in the basement. It needs work, but it has potential. Elias stared at the contract. Why are you doing this? Vivian finally looked up at him, her eyes sharp behind designer glasses. Because I'm old, Elias, and I'm tired of watching talent die on the vine. I saw what happened on that stage last night. I saw 2 ghosts, remember they were still alive, and I want more of that before I go. But I'm not. Don't you dare say you're not ready. You've been ready since the moment you walked into this building with a mop in one hand and a violin in the other. You just needed to remember what you were waiting for. Elias sat down slowly. I can't afford to quit my job. You're not listening. The residency includes a stipend. Not much, but enough, Felix already knows. He cried, by the way, blubbered something about always knowing you were special. Elias almost smiled. And the project, whatever you want, but if you're asking for my opinion, he nodded. I'd say follow the blueprint that little girl left behind. Build something that would make her proud. He looked down at the contract, then back at Vivian. I need to think about it. No, you don't. You've been thinking about it for 3 years. What you need to do is sign it. She pushed a pen across the desk. You know what Clara would say. He picked up the pen. She'd say, Daddy, stop being a scaredy cat. Vivian laughed. Smart girl. Later that afternoon, Elias found Isabel in the courtyard, wrapped in a thick coat, watching students hurry between buildings as snow dusted the pathways. He approached silently, but she sensed him anyway, turning with a small smile. You got the offer. News travels fast. In places built on whispers, yes. Elias sat beside her on the stone bench. You knew, I suspected. Vivian doesn't make that face when she talks about just anyone. That face like she's planning a coup. He exhaled, his breath clouding in the cold air. I don't know if I'm ready to be seen again. Isabel looked at him steadily. Ready has nothing to do with it. None of us are ready for the things that matter. He met her gaze. I signed it. Good. I need help with the project. Better. He cleared his throat. There's one more thing. The old practice room, B14. It's going to need work. A lot of it. I can do most of it myself, but say it, Elias. I need a partner. Someone who understands why this matters. Someone who knows what it's like to lose music and find it again. Isabel tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, fighting a smile. Are you asking me to help you build a music school in a basement? I'm asking you to help me build Clara's dream, and maybe find pieces of yours in the process. She didn't hesitate. Yes. That night they met in B14 for the first time. The room was a disaster. Water stains on the ceiling, peeling paint, broken chairs stacked against the wall, and a smell of mildew that made Isabel wrinkle her nose. Well, at least it has good acoustics, she said, clapping once to hear the sound bounce back. Elias shook his head. It has potential. That's all we need. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, smoothed it on the lone desk. Clara's drawing. The original sketch for what she'd imagined. A small, warm room with instruments on the walls, benches instead of chairs, and windows that let in light even on dark days. Isabel traced the crayon lines with her finger. She saw it so clearly. Elias nodded. She always did, even when I didn't. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the dim room, looking at a child's dream drawn in purple crayon, and somehow it didn't seem impossible anymore. It seemed inevitable. Over the next few weeks, B14 slowly transformed. Elias spent every spare hour there, tearing out rotting drywall, replacing broken floorboards, fighting years of neglect with the same quiet determination he'd once applied to pushing a mop. Isabel came whenever she could, bringing coffee, paint samples, and occasionally her laptop to work on grant applications while he measured and hammered. They didn't always talk, but the silence between them had changed quality. It wasn't empty anymore. One evening, as they were priming the newly patched walls, Isabel's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowned, and set it down with deliberate care. Julian? Elias asked without looking up from his paint roller. She nodded. He's still trying to convince me to take the editorial position. Says he can smooth things over with the board. Elias dipped his roller in the tray. What does he really want? She sighed. Control. The same thing he's always wanted. He can't stand that I chose this instead of him. They worked in silence for a few minutes. You gave up a lot, Elias said finally. Isabel shook her head. I gave up noise. I found music. She said it simply, without drama, and Elias felt something shift inside his chest. A recognition. The day of the official announcement came, and Elias found himself standing awkwardly in the administrative hallway, waiting to be called into the board meeting. He wore his one good shirt, faded at the cuffs but clean, and held his violin case like a shield. Behind the closed door, he could hear raised voices, one in particular sharp with displeasure. Julian. Isabel appeared at his side, slightly breathless. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic." He nodded. "Your father's in there." Her expression tightened. "I know. Vivian warned me. He's trying to block the residency. Says it's inappropriate for someone with my credentials to be involved in a basement charity project." Elias's jaw clenched. "And what did Vivian say?" Isabel's lips curved. She told him that if he wanted to discuss inappropriate, they could start with the way he's managed his foundation's finances for the past decade. Elias almost smiled. "She fights dirty, only when it matters." The door opened. A secretary peered out. "Mr. Ward, Ms. Vance, they're ready for you." They entered together into a room of polished wood and skeptical faces. Julian sat at one end of the table, impeccable in a tailored suit, his expression a mask of professional concern. Vivian sat at the head, her scarf today a defiant red. "Please have a seat," said one of the board members, an older man with kindly eyes. "We understand you have a proposal to present." Elias nodded, but before he could speak, Julian cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. The conservatory has standards, traditions. A janitor, regardless of past accomplishments, is hardly qualified to establish a teaching program under our name." Elias felt Isabel tense beside him, but to everyone's surprise, he smiled. A real smile, the kind that starts in the eyes. "You're right, Mr. Vance. A janitor isn't qualified." Julian blinked, clearly thrown. "But I'm not here as a janitor. I'm here as a father who knows what music can save and what it can't." Elias placed his violin on the table and opened his case, but instead of taking out the instrument, he removed a stack of papers from the compartment beneath it. The Clara Project isn't about prestige or tradition. It's about access. There are children in this city who will never touch a real instrument, never mind afford lessons. They'll grow up thinking music is something that happens to other people, more privileged people. He passed the papers around, detailed plans, budgets, curriculum outlines. Every child deserves the chance to make something beautiful, even if their hands are dirty. Especially then, the board members glanced at each other, some nodding, others frowning. Julian leaned forward. "This is a conservatory, not a charity. Our mission is excellence, not inclusion." Vivian's voice cut through the room like a well-tuned string. "Our mission, Julian, is music in all its forms, and I don't recall asking for your opinion on our internal matters." Another board member, a woman with steel gray hair, adjusted her glasses. "The budget seems reasonable and the space is currently unused. I see no reason not to approve a pilot program." Julian stood. "This is absurd. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. He's not one of us anymore." Elias met his gaze evenly. "I never was. That's why it will work." A quiet fell over the room. Then Vivian spoke. "All in favor?" Hands rose, 7 out of 9. Julian's face darkened to a dangerous shade. "This is a mistake." "No," Isabel said, speaking for the first time. "This is correction." As they left the meeting, Julian caught Isabel's arm in the hallway. His voice was low, meant only for her. "You're throwing away everything I built for you." "And for what? A janitor with a sob story?" She looked at her father, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. The perfect suit that couldn't hide the hollowness behind his eyes. The manicured hands that had never created, only acquired. "No, Dad, I'm building something you never could. Something real. I apologize for my error in word counting. Let me continue part 2, adding approximately 1,500 more words to complete the section properly." Julian's face tightened with anger, but something else flickered behind his eyes. For just a moment, he looked older, smaller. "If you do this, don't expect me to be there when it fails. I never expected you to be there when anything succeeded." Isabel replied, then turned and walked away, back straight, steps measured. She found Elias waiting by the elevator, his face a question. "It's done, we got it." Relief softened his features. He pressed the button for the basement. "Then I guess we have work to do." The renovation of B14 continued with new urgency. Word spread through the conservatory about the janitor's project, drawing curiosity and occasionally help. A cello professor donated old music stands. A retired piano tuner volunteered his services for the battered upright they'd salvaged from storage. Students began to linger in the hallway, watching as the room transformed. One afternoon, Elias was struggling with a stubborn wall panel when a voice startled him. "You're doing it wrong." A boy of about 12 stood in the doorway, violin case clutched to his chest. His name was Mateo, one of the scholarship students who usually practiced alone in the far corridors. "The grain goes the other way. My dad's a carpenter." Elias looked at the panel, then back at the boy. "Show me." Together they reworked the installation, the boy's small hands surprisingly confident with the tools. When they finished, Elias nodded. "Thank you." Mateo shrugged, eyes darting around the room. "What is this place going to be? A music school for kids who can't afford lessons?" The boy considered this. "Like me before the scholarship?" Elias nodded. "Exactly like that." Mateo's fingers tightened around his violin case. "Can I help sometimes? After my lessons?" Elias felt something unfamiliar tug at the corner of his mouth. A smile, not forced, not polite, just real. "We could use another carpenter." That evening, when Isabel arrived with dinner, takeout containers balanced precariously in one arm, she found Elias and Mateo sitting cross-legged on the newly finished floor, deep in conversation about the acoustic properties of different woods. "I see you found an assistant," she said, setting down the food. Mateo scrambled to his feet, suddenly shy. "I was just helping with the panels, and doing a better job than I was," Elias added, rising more slowly. Isabel extended her hand to the boy. "I'm Isabel. Welcome to the Clara Project." The boy shook her hand solemnly. "That's a pretty name. For the room, I mean. It was Clara's idea, Mr. Ward's daughter." Mateo looked between them. "Is she coming to teach too?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Elias's breath caught. Isabel stepped closer to him, their shoulders almost touching. "She's not with us anymore." "But her music is." Mateo's face fell. "Oh, I'm sorry, it's okay," Elias said quietly. "She would have liked you. She was always bringing home strays, birds with broken wings, kids who needed someone to play with. She had a way of finding the ones who needed finding." Mateo nodded, understanding more than his age might suggest. "Like me. Exactly like you." The boy left shortly after, promising to return the next day. When the door closed behind him, Elias sat heavily on a paint bucket, suddenly drained. "You okay?" Isabel asked, her voice gentle. He nodded. "It's strange. 6 months ago, I couldn't say her name without feeling like I was drowning. Now I just told her story to a complete stranger and it felt, right, like she was in the room again. Not gone, just elsewhere." Isabel sat beside him, their knees almost touching. "That's how healing works, I think. Not forgetting, just remembering differently." The next morning, a surprise waited outside B14. A line of instrument cases, 3 violins, a dented trumpet, and a clarinet missing keys, with a note from various faculty members. "For the Clara Project, may they find new voices." Word was spreading. By the end of the week, 5 more students had volunteered their time. A retired music teacher called to offer her services. The local newspaper ran a small piece about the initiative, featuring a photo of Elias and Mateo installing shelving. The work continued, punctuated by small victories and occasional setbacks. A pipe burst, flooding one corner. The electricity failed during a critical painting day, but each problem was met with the same steady resolve that had kept Elias moving forward all these years. One evening, as they were sorting through donated sheet music, Isabel found herself watching Elias. The way his hands moved over the pages, gentle but precise. The slight furrow between his brows when he concentrated. The occasional softening around his eyes when he found a piece Clara had once played. "I've been thinking," she said finally. He looked up. "Dangerous habit. About my sister, about music, about what happens when you stop running from the thing that broke you." He set down the music, giving her his full attention. "And I think I'm ready to play again. Really play. Not just for practice, not just for us, for others." Elias was quiet for a moment. "You're sure?" "No," she laughed softly. "That's what makes it brave, right?" He nodded, understanding perfectly. "What piece? Something Eleanor loved." "The Debussy she was playing when it happened. Yes, I think I need to finish it, for both of us." Elias considered this, then stood and crossed to a shelf where he'd been organizing the more advanced repertoire. He pulled out a worn folio, handed it to her. I found this in storage. It's the full score. Isabel took it, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened to the familiar opening measures. Notes her sister's hands had touched. Music that had been the last thing Eleanor heard. Will you help me prepare? Every step. As opening day approached, B14 transformed from construction site to sanctuary. Walls painted a warm gold. Instruments mounted on special racks. A quote from Clara's drawing, stenciled above the door, "Music is how joy sounds when life gets loud." Donations continued to arrive, music stands, chairs, a digital keyboard, even a small cello sized for a child. Each gift came with a note, often from people they'd never met, touched by the story that had spread through the city's music community. The night before the official opening, Elias and Isabel stayed late, putting final touches on the space. She hung photographs. Clara at her first recital, Eleanor mid-performance, both radiant with the joy of creation. He arranged the chairs in a circle rather than rows, so that no student would feel less important than another. When they finished, they stood in the center of the room, surveying their work. The space wasn't perfect. The ceiling still had water stains they couldn't quite cover. The piano was out of tune in the highest register, but it was alive. It was ready. I keep thinking about that first night, Isabel said softly. You alone in the lobby with that broken violin. Me hiding in the balcony. How neither of us had any idea. Elias nodded. How could we? Do you believe in fate now? He considered the question, looking around at the room they'd built from grief and hope and stubborn persistence. I believe in choice, in how even when we're drowning, we're still choosing which way to swim. She smiled. That sounds like something Clara would say. She was always the wise one. A comfortable silence fell between them, different from all the silences before. This one was full, expectant. Isabel took a breath. There's something else I've been thinking about. He waited. Us. This. Whatever it is we're building that isn't just about music or memory. Elias met her gaze, steady and clear. I know. Are you scared? Terrified, but I'd rather be terrified and alive than safe and buried. She moved closer until she could feel the warmth of him. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard you say. Not the bravest thing I've done, no. She raised an eyebrow. He shook his head. The bravest was letting you hear me play that first night. Everything else has just been following that note to see where it leads. Isabel reached for his hand, and this time when their fingers interlaced, it wasn't grief that bound them. It was possibility. The opening day of the Clara project dawned clear and cold. Sunlight spilled through the basement windows they'd painstakingly cleaned, casting golden squares across the freshly waxed floor. Chairs arranged in a welcoming circle, instruments waiting patiently on their stands. Sheet music sorted by difficulty rather than prestige. Elias arrived early, dressed not in his janitor's uniform or in formal concert attire, but simply as himself. Dark jeans, a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and Clara's silver clef pin on the collar. He moved through the room, straightening what didn't need straightening, adjusting what was already perfect. A father preparing a place for children who hadn't yet arrived. Isabel joined him 30 minutes later, carrying a small cake with the Clara project, written in slightly wobbly icing. I'm not much of a baker, she admitted. He smiled. It's perfect. They set it on the piano next to a framed copy of Clara's original drawing, a vision made real. The first student arrived 10 minutes early. Mateo, hair slicked down with obvious effort, violin case clutched to his chest like a shield. Behind him came a steady stream of others. 5 scholarship students from the conservatory, 3 children from the local public school's struggling music program, and most surprising, 2 adults. A woman in her 60s who had always wanted to learn piano but never had the chance, and a young man who worked as a nighttime security guard and dreamed of playing cello. By 10 o'clock, every chair was filled. 15 faces, nervous, expectant, hopeful. Elias cleared his throat. Welcome to the Clara Project. This isn't a typical music school. We don't care about perfection. We care about voice, about finding yours, whatever it sounds like. Some of you might become professional musicians someday. Others might play only for yourselves. Both are equally important. Isabel stepped forward. Music isn't about impressing people. It's about connecting with yourself, with others, with something larger than any of us. That's what we're here to do. A small hand raised, a girl of about 7, her hair in meticulous braids. Who's Clara? Elias felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but it was different now. Looser, bearable. Clara was my daughter. She loved music more than anything. She believed everyone deserved a chance to play, even if their circumstances made it hard. This room is her dream. The girl nodded solemnly. Is she coming later? Elias knelt down to the child's level. In a way, she's already here. Whenever we play, whenever we listen to each other, whenever we find joy in sound. That's Clara. The girl considered this, then offered her own childish wisdom. Like when my grandpa plays records. He says grandma is dancing even though she's in heaven. Exactly like that. The first lesson began simply. What music means to each person in the circle. The answers varied: escape, expression, comfort, challenge. But underneath them all ran the same current. Connection. To self, to others, to memory, to hope. As Elias helped a young boy position his fingers on a violin string, he glanced across the room to where Isabel sat at the piano with the elderly woman, their heads bent together over the keys. Their eyes met briefly, and in that glance passed a wordless acknowledgement. This is what healing looks like. Not perfect, not painless, but possible. Outside B14, unnoticed by anyone inside, Julian Vance stood in the shadowed hallway, watching through the small window in the door. His face betrayed nothing, but his hand, when it reached into his pocket, emerged with a check. He slipped it under the door and walked away, steps echoing in the empty corridor. The envelope was addressed simply, "For Clara's dream." 6 months later, the basement of the Westridge Conservatory didn't look like much from the outside. Still the same chipped brick walls and dusty windows, but inside it had become something else entirely. Posters of smiling children lined the newly painted walls. Colorful instruments, many donated, some lovingly repaired by Elias himself, filled the old storage shelves. And above the entrance, in bold block letters cut from wood by one of the students' fathers, hung the sign, "The Clara Project," where every note finds a home. Elias stood just inside the door, adjusting the bow tie of a young boy who fidgeted in his oversized vest. "You ready, Mateo?" The boy nodded nervously. "Remember what we practiced?" Elias asked. "Smile, breathe, and pretend they're all just moms and dads." Elias grinned. "Exactly. And don't forget what music's for." The boy blinked. "What's that?" "To say what your heart's been waiting to say." Mateo beamed. "Like you said before, music's how we speak without asking permission." Elias's throat tightened. You listened. The small recital hall buzzed with laughter and soft chatter. Parents, social workers, and curious visitors filled every seat. The Clara Project's first official student performance was about to begin. Not a polished showcase, but a celebration of second chances. At the back of the room, Isabel adjusted her camera. She'd stepped back from public criticism and into private purpose, documenting the kids' journeys with journalistic grace. Her new column, Notes from the Basement, had gone viral again, not for its bite, but for its heart. Vivian sat in the front row, a silk scarf wrapped around her shoulders, clapping like a proud grandmother for every student that walked on stage. "You know," she had whispered to Isabel earlier, "this place always had good acoustics. It just needed the right kind of echo." As the lights dimmed, Elias stepped up to the microphone. He hadn't prepared a speech. That wasn't his way, but he looked at the children, some tugging at their shirts, some bouncing their knees in excitement, and then at the parents who had never expected their children to find music in a janitor's classroom. He cleared his throat. "My daughter once said, 'Even if you forget the music, I won't. I'll be in every note you play.'" He paused. "I forgot for a while. Not the love, but the sound. Grief does that, turns down the volume on life. But these kids, they've turned it back up." A soft murmur of emotion swept through the room. So tonight isn't about technique. It's not about tempo. It's about heart and hope and honoring every note we almost didn't get to play. The room erupted in warm applause. Elias stepped aside as Mateo took center stage, violin trembling slightly in his small hands. And then he played. The melody was simple, imperfect, and achingly beautiful, raw like truth, delicate like forgiveness. Backstage, Elias stood beside Isabel, their shoulders touching lightly. "He's playing her lullaby," she whispered. Elias nodded. "I didn't teach him that." He found it himself in the corner of an old sheet Clara scribbled on. Isabel placed a hand on his. "She's here. She never left." They watched in silence, tears quietly lining their eyes. When the last note faded, the room burst into applause. Mateo gave a shy bow, cheeks red, and ran straight into Elias's arms. "You were incredible," Elias whispered. "You made her proud." The boy looked confused. "Who?" "A girl who loved this place before you did." Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and laughter echoed down the hallway, Elias locked the door and turned to Isabel. "You know, I thought I was supposed to leave a legacy through my talent, through some grand performance the world would never forget." She raised an eyebrow. "And now?" He looked around the small room, scuffed floor, out-of-tune piano, and dozens of hand-drawn posters by kids who once thought they had no voice. "Turns out the most lasting notes aren't the ones we play for crowds. They're the ones we leave behind in other people's hearts." Isabel smiled. "You didn't just build a classroom, you built a chorus of futures." They stood there for a long while, no rush, no fear, just a kind of peace neither had felt in years. Outside, the sky shifted to soft indigo. A few kids lingered by the bench in the park across the street, sharing headphones and humming along to a song they didn't know the name of. One of the girls, no more than 10, turned to Elias as he and Isabel stepped out. "Mr. Ward?" He turned. "Yes? I like that boy's song. I want to sound like him." Elias smiled gently, then glanced at the mural they'd painted together, a portrait of Clara holding a violin, her eyes full of mischief and light. He looked back at the girl and said simply, "You do." The wind picked up, carrying with it a single crumpled sheet of music that fluttered down the sidewalk before coming to rest at Elias's feet. He picked it up, turned it over. In crayon, barely legible, beneath smudges of time, were the words, "Keep playing, Dad. Love, Clara." Isabel took his hand. And as they walked into the evening light, not away from the past, but towards something new, the music followed, not as sound, but as a promise. The Clara project flourished beyond anyone's expectations. What began as a single room with 15 students grew steadily over the next year. 30 students became 50. One class became 5. The waiting list stretched longer each month. On a crisp autumn morning, Elias sat at his desk, a battered thing salvaged from storage, reviewing applications for the winter session. Each form told a story: a 9-year-old who'd been saving allowance money for a violin she couldn't afford, a teenager who'd dropped out of school but found solace in the structure of classical composition, a 70-year-old man who'd always dreamed of playing the cello. Isabel entered with 2 coffee cups, setting one beside him. "You've been at it since dawn. I want to accept all of them." She leaned against the desk. "We don't have the space, or the instruments, or enough hours in the day." He sighed, rubbing his eyes. "I know. But every time I put one in the wait list pile, I hear Clara saying we're missing someone important." Isabel took his hand. "Maybe we need to think bigger." "How much bigger?" She pulled a folded newspaper from her bag, opened it to a highlighted listing. "The old McGrath building on 4th is for sale. It's been empty for years. 3 floors, open layout, walking distance from 2 public schools." Elias stared at her. "You can't be serious. We can barely afford supplies." She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Remember that envelope Julian slipped under the door after opening day? The anonymous donation." Not so anonymous. I recognized his handwriting. "And it turns out our mysterious benefactor has been making regular deposits to the project account. Substantial ones." Elias frowned. "Why would he do that?" She shrugged. "People are complicated, even Julian Vance." Elias picked up the newspaper, studied the building. "It's a dream." "So was this, 6 months ago." She gestured around the room that had once been a forgotten storage space. Now the walls vibrated with music at all hours, marked with the fingerprints of children who came to play, to learn, to remember how to make joy out of sound. He looked up at her, seeing not just what they'd built, but what they might yet create. "We'd need a real staff. Fundraising, a board, already working on it. Vivian has connections. Felix's brother is a contractor who owes him a favor. 3 of the conservatory professors have offered to teach master classes pro bono. Elias shook his head, amazed. When did you become the dreamer and I the practical one? She leaned down, kissed his forehead. About the time you taught me how to hear music and a mop hitting the floor. Later that week, they stood in the empty McGrath building, their footsteps echoing through cavernous rooms long abandoned. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light from high windows. The floors creaked with stories of a century past. Elias walked slowly, testing the acoustics with soft claps, measuring distances with practiced steps, imagining walls where none existed. It needs everything, new wiring, plumbing, floors. But the bones are good, Isabel said, running her hand along a sturdy column. Like someone else I know. Elias smiled faintly. It would take a miracle. It would take work, and help, and time. He stood in what might become the main performance space, closing his eyes to hear the potential in the silence. When he opened them, Isabel was watching him with a tenderness that still sometimes caught him off guard. You're already hearing it, aren't you? The music this place could hold. He nodded. Not just hear it. I can see them, the kids who haven't even found us yet. The ones who think music belongs to someone else. They wandered upstairs to smaller rooms perfect for individual lessons, to a sunlit space that might become a library of scores and recordings, to a corner office with a view of the park beyond. This could be yours, she said, standing in the doorway of what might become the director's office. He shook his head. Ours. I can't do this alone, Isabel. She stepped closer. You don't have to, not anymore. In the car afterward, Elias was quiet, staring out the window as the city blurred past. Isabel drove, giving him the space she knew he needed when overwhelmed. Finally, he spoke. I keep waiting for the catch, for the moment when all this gets taken away. She glanced at him. After everything you've been through, that makes sense. But it doesn't, does it? To still be bracing for the blow, even when things are going right. She reached for his hand. Grief teaches us to guard against joy, to treat it like a guest who might leave any second. It takes time to learn it might stay. He looked at her then, really looked at her. When did you get so wise? She smiled. I've had a good teacher, a janitor with a broken violin who showed me that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most damaged instruments. The planning began in earnest. Architectural drawings, budget proposals, grant applications, a dream taking shape in blueprints and spreadsheets. Isabel devoted herself to the practical side, leveraging her connections in the music world to secure donations and support. Elias continued teaching at the basement location, refining the curriculum that would form the foundation of the expanded program. Meanwhile, the relationship between them deepened, but neither rushed to define it. They'd both learned the hard way that some things needed time to find their own rhythm. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of meetings with potential donors, they sat on the floor of the basement room, takeout containers between them, comparing notes. The Simpson Foundation is interested, but they want naming rights, Isabel said, reviewing her notebook. Absolutely not. It stays the Clara Project. She nodded, unsurprised. That's what I told them. But we need the money, Elias. We'll find it somewhere else. She watched him carefully. You sure this isn't about pride? He set down his fork. It's about promise. I promised her this would be hers, not some corporate legacy, not some tax write-off. Hers. Isabel touched his arm. I understand, and I agree. We'll find another way. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the occasional scrape of plastic forks against containers. I've been thinking, Elias said finally, about Clara's trust fund, the money from the insurance after the fire. I never touched it, couldn't bear to, but it's just sitting there. Isabel set down her food. How much? Enough for the down payment on the building, maybe more. She measured her words carefully. Are you sure that's what you want to do? He nodded. She would have wanted this, to give other kids what she had, a chance to find their voice. Isabel smiled softly. Then let's do it. The next day, Elias found himself in an unfamiliar place, the marble lobby of First National Bank, dressed in his one good suit, too tight at the shoulders. The trust officer eyed him with thinly veiled skepticism. And you're certain you want to liquidate the entire trust? It's a substantial sum. I'm certain. The officer peered over his glasses. The terms specify that these funds are to be used for your daughter's education and welfare. Given the circumstances, Elias met his gaze steadily. This is for her education, just not in the way you might think. He explained the Clara project, its mission, its growth, its future. As he spoke, the officer's expression gradually shifted from doubt to interest. That's actually quite remarkable, Mr. Ward. Still, there are procedures, paperwork. It could take weeks to access the funds. Elias nodded, resigned to bureaucracy. I understand. The officer hesitated, then lowered his voice. My nephew is on the autism spectrum. He struggled for years to connect with others until he found music therapy. Now he plays the piano. Not particularly well. He smiled slightly. But it's his voice when words fail him. He pulled out a different form. There's an expedited process we can use. Special circumstances. I believe this qualifies. Elias blinked, surprised. Thank you. The officer shook his head. No, Mr. Ward, thank you. 3 days later, they made an offer on the McGrath building. 2 weeks after that, it was accepted. The real work was just beginning. The renovation consumed them. Days blurred into nights. The basement program continued to operate while they prepared for the expansion. Elias split his time between teaching and overseeing construction, often falling asleep amid blueprints and lesson plans. Isabel coordinated volunteers, wrote grant proposals, and continued her column, now focused on the transformation underway. Through it all, Mateo remained their most dedicated helper, showing up after school each day to assist however he could. He'd grown 2 inches since joining the program, and his playing had improved remarkably. But the biggest change was in his confidence. I want to teach someday, he told Elias one afternoon as they painted window frames in what would become the new recital hall. Elias smiled. You already are. I've seen you with the younger kids. Mateo ducked his head, pleased. It feels good, like I'm giving back what you gave me. And what's that? The boy considered. A place to belong that isn't about how much money my family has or what neighborhood I'm from. Elias ruffled the boy's hair, leaving a streak of white paint that neither of them noticed. That's exactly what Clara wanted. As the renovation progressed, interest in the program grew. Local media picked up the story. A feature in the Sunday paper brought a flood of inquiries. A television crew came to film a segment about the janitor turned music director who transformed a basement storage room into a thriving community program. Elias hated the attention, but understood its necessity. Each interview, each feature brought more support, more resources, more opportunities for the children they served. One rainy Tuesday, Isabel burst into the makeshift office they'd set up at the construction site, waving a letter. You're not going to believe this. Elias looked up from the inventory list he'd been reviewing. Good news or bad? She handed him the letter, eyes bright with excitement. The National Arts Council. They want to feature the Clara project in their annual showcase. In Washington, D.C., they'll fly 4 of our students to perform at the Kennedy Center. Elias stared at the letterhead, the official seal, the formal invitation. This can't be real. It is, and there's more. The showcase is attended by major donors from across the country. This could secure our funding for years. He sat back, overwhelmed. How did they even find us? She bit her lip. I may have submitted an application. Months ago, I never thought they'd actually select us. He shook his head, amazed. The kids will be over the moon. But which 4? They spent the evening reviewing their students' progress, agonizing over the selection. In the end, they chose Mateo and 3 others who'd been with the program since the beginning. A cellist, a pianist, and a flutist. Each from different backgrounds, different neighborhoods, different circumstances, but united by their growth through music. The news electrified the program. The chosen 4 practiced with renewed dedication. The other students rallied around them, offering encouragement and constructive criticism. What might have bred jealousy instead fostered community. As the showcase approached, Elias worked with the quartet daily, refining their piece, an original composition they'd created together, incorporating elements of classical, jazz, and the folk music of their various cultural backgrounds. It wasn't technically perfect, but it was authentically theirs. The week before the trip, Elias received an unexpected visitor. Julian Vance appeared at the construction site, impeccable as always in a tailored overcoat, looking out of place amid the sawdust and exposed beams. Mr. Ward, Mr. Vance. The two men regarded each other warily. Julian surveyed the space, noting the progress, the potential. You've accomplished a great deal in a short time. We've had help. Julian nodded, acknowledging the implicit reference to his anonymous donations. I'm not here to interfere. I wanted to see for myself what my money is supporting. Elias folded his arms. And? Julian's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes had softened since their last encounter. It's impressive. Unconventional, but impressive. Thank you. A silence stretched between them, decades of misunderstanding and resentment not easily bridged. Finally, Julian spoke. I've heard about the Kennedy Center showcase. It's quite an honor. Elias nodded. For the children, yes. Julian hesitated, then reached into his coat. I have connections at several major foundations, philanthropists who support arts education. He handed Elias a slim envelope. Contact information. Tell them I sent you. It might help with your next phase of funding. Elias took the envelope, surprised. Why are you doing this? Julian looked away, his gaze falling on a photograph of Clara pinned to the temporary office wall. I've spent my career identifying and cultivating exceptional talent. It's what I do. He met Elias's eyes again. What you're building here is exceptional. Different from anything I would have created, but exceptional nonetheless. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, you were right about Clara. She needed a father more than she needed a career. I didn't understand that then. Before Elias could respond, Julian was gone, the quiet click of expensive shoes on concrete fading into silence. That evening, Elias relayed the encounter to Isabel as they sat on the floor of what would become the new recital hall, sharing a pizza and watching the sunset through newly installed windows. So he finally admitted you were right. In his way, still didn't apologize. She smiled wryly. Baby steps. For Julian, that's practically a revelation. Elias studied her face in the fading light. Does it bother you, working so closely with him all these years, only to walk away? She considered the question. Sometimes. He gave me opportunities, opened doors, but he also shaped me into someone I'm not sure I wanted to be. Critical, perfectionistic, always looking for the flaw instead of the beauty. She took a bite of pizza. What about you? Does it bother you that he's supporting this place after what he did? Elias leaned back against the wall. Claire used to say that sometimes the best people can do mean things, and sometimes mean people can do beautiful things. She was smarter than both of us. Isabel rested her head on his shoulder. Wisdom from the mouth of babes. They sat together as darkness fell, the empty building creaking and settling around them, full of promise and possibility. The trip to Washington was a whirlwind. For the four students, most of whom had never left the city, much less flown on a plane, everything was an adventure. The hotel with its plush carpets and elevators, the monuments gleaming white against the blue sky, the vast marble halls of the Kennedy Center itself. Backstage before the performance, Mateo paced nervously, his borrowed suit slightly too large, his violin case clutched like a lifeline. I can't do this. There are real musicians out there. Important people. Elias knelt before him. Look at me. You are a real musician. You have something to say that no one else can say exactly the way you can. That's what makes it valuable. The boy's eyes were wide with fear. What if I mess up? Then you mess up, and you keep going. Just like in life, Isabel joined them, elegant in a simple black dress. It's time. The quartet took their places on the grand stage, small figures beneath soaring ceilings and dazzling lights. For a moment, they seemed to shrink, overwhelmed by the grandeur. Then Mateo, as first violin, raised his bow. The piece began tentatively, each player finding their way into the melody. There were small mistakes, a rushed entrance, a slightly flat note. But as they continued, something remarkable happened. The audience leaned forward. The children's confidence grew. The music took flight. In the wings, Elias and Isabel watched, hands clasped tightly together. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. This moment was the culmination of everything they'd worked for. Not perfect performance, but authentic expression. Not technically flawless playing, but soul-deep communication. When the final note faded, there was a moment of hushed silence. Then applause erupted, rolling through the hall like thunder. The children stood frozen, stunned by the response. until Mateo remembered to bow, the others following his lead with varying degrees of grace. Backstage, they were mobbed by well-wishers, arts administrators, foundation directors, other performers. Business cards were pressed into Elias's hands. Promises of support and collaboration flowed freely. In the corner, Isabel noticed a familiar figure observing the scene. Julian stood apart from the crowd, but his presence was unmistakable. Their eyes met across the room. He offered a small nod, acknowledgement, perhaps respect. She returned it, neither warm nor cold, simply present. Later at the reception, Elias found himself surrounded by potential donors, each eager to associate themselves with the project that had captivated the audience. He answered questions politely but felt increasingly out of place amid the cocktail dresses and champagne flutes. Isabel appeared at his side, slipping her arm through his. "Let's get some air." They escaped to a terrace overlooking the Potomac, the night air cool against their skin, the city lights reflecting on the dark water below. "Everyone loves them," Elias said, loosening his tie. She smiled. "They should. They're magnificent. Not because they are perfect, because they're real." That's what people responded to. Authenticity cuts through all the noise. He leaned against the stone balustrade. "What now? We've got offers of support from at least 5 major foundations. Talk of satellite programs in other cities. Someone even mentioned a documentary." She studied his profile in the moonlight. "What do you want, Elias? Not for the project, not for the kids, for you." He was quiet for a long moment. "I want to wake up knowing that what I'm doing matters, that Clara's life, short as it was, continues to ripple outward, that her voice wasn't silenced, just transformed. And beyond that," he turned to her, his expression open, vulnerable. "I want to build something lasting, with you, whatever shape that takes." She stepped closer. "I think we already are." He touched her face gently. "I've been afraid to say it, to name it, as if putting words to it might break the spell." She smiled. "Some things don't need names to be real. Like the best music. You don't have to understand it to feel it." They stood together under the vast screen, the sounds of the reception fading behind them, the future unfolding before them. Uncertain, imperfect, but full of possibility. The grand opening of the Clara Project's new home came on a perfect spring day, exactly 2 years after Elias had first played his broken violin in an empty lobby. The McGrath building had been transformed, its brick facade restored, its windows gleaming, its interior a harmony of open spaces and intimate practice rooms. Above the main entrance, a stained glass window caught the morning light, a design based on Clara's original drawing, a swirl of color and music rendered in glass and lead. Inside, the recital hall buzzed with anticipation. 300 seats, all filled. On stage, chairs arranged for the student orchestra, 75 children from across the city, some who'd been with the program from the beginning, others who joined along the way. Backstage, Elias straightened his jacket, new for the occasion, but still comfortable, still himself. No tuxedo, no pretense. Isabel appeared beside him, radiant in a simple blue dress, her hair swept up, a small silver clef pin, matching his, on her collar. "Nervous?" she asked. He shook his head. Grateful. The house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience. Elias stepped onto the stage, into the single spotlight. 2 years ago, I was pushing a mop through an empty hallway, carrying a broken violin and a heart to match. I played when no one was listening because I thought no one should hear. But someone did. His eyes found Isabel in the wings. Sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places. From a critic who forgot how to listen. From children who remind us why music matters. From a daughter whose voice continues long after she's gone. He gestured to the mural on the back wall, Clara's face rendered in vibrant color, watching over the space that bore her name. The Clara Project isn't about creating professional musicians, though some of these children may choose that path. It's about creating a place where every voice matters, where music isn't a commodity, but a birthright, where what's broken can still make beautiful sound. Isabel joined him on stage, taking his hand. Today, we dedicate this building not just to Clara, but to every child who has ever been told their voice doesn't matter, to every parent who has sacrificed for their child's joy. To every person who believes that art isn't a luxury, but a necessity. Together they turned to the wings and beckoned. The students filed onto the stage, a rainbow of faces, backgrounds, abilities. They took their places, instruments at the ready. In the front row, Vivian Moret dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Beside her, to everyone's surprise, sat Julian Vance, his expression unreadable, but his presence undeniable. Elias lifted his violin, repaired now, but still bearing the scars of its journey. Isabel moved to the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys she'd once been afraid to touch. Mateo, now first chair, raised his bow in readiness. And then they played. Not Clara's lullaby this time, but a new piece composed collectively by the students and teachers, titled simply, The Notes We Leave Behind. It wove together classical structures with contemporary rhythms, leaving space for brief solos from each section. A democracy of sound. As the music filled the hall, Elias closed his eyes briefly and saw Clara. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a continuation. In every note played by small hands discovering their power. In every face lifted toward the music. In every heart finding its rhythm after loss. The piece ended not with a dramatic crescendo, but with a gentle diminuendo, fading to a whisper that lingered in the silence that followed. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the applause began, rising like a tide, washing over the stage in waves of affirmation. Afterward, amid the celebration, Elias slipped away briefly to the small office that had once been a janitor's closet. He sat at the desk, now cluttered with student compositions and grant proposals, and opened the drawer where he kept Clara's original drawing. The paper had grown fragile with age and handling. The crayon faded, but the vision remained clear. A place where music belonged to everyone, where joy sounded loud even when life got noisy. Isabel found him there, leaning in the doorway, watching him with quiet understanding. The board wants to talk expansion. 3 more cities have reached out about starting their own programs. Elias carefully returned the drawing to its drawer. Let them wait. Today is for celebrating what we've built, not planning what comes next. She smiled. Wise words from a janitor. He stood, crossing to her. Former janitor, current dreamer. She took his hand. Both, I think. The man who cleans what's broken and the man who makes it sing again. Outside, the party continued. Children racing through new hallways, parents admiring practice rooms, donors writing checks, community members claiming the space as their own. Vivian held court near the refreshment table, regaling a group of foundation directors with the story of how she'd hired a Juilliard graduate to mop floors, knowing someday he'd remember how to play. In a quiet corner, Julian stood alone, watching the celebration with an expression that had softened over time. Elias approached him, 2 glasses of sparkling cider in hand. He offered one silently. Julian accepted with a nod. You've created something remarkable here. We had help. Julian acknowledged the point with a slight incline of his head. I was wrong about many things, Mr. Ward. About Clara, about what matters in music, about my own daughter. He glanced across the room to where Isabel was kneeling beside a young girl struggling with her flute fingering. She's happier than I've ever seen her, even before Eleanor died. Elias followed his gaze. She found her voice again. We both did. Julian sipped his cider. I won't pretend to understand fully what you've built here. It's not the kind of music education I believe in. A pause, but I respect it, and I'll continue to support it. Elias studied the man beside him, still proud, still certain of his values, but perhaps a fraction more open to other possibilities. Clara would have liked that. She believed everyone deserved a second movement. Julian almost smiled, wise beyond her years, like her father. The 2 men stood in silence for a moment, not friends, not enemies, but something in between, connected by the people they loved, by the music that had shaped them in different ways. Later, as the day faded into evening and the building gradually emptied, Elias and Isabel walked through the quiet halls, turning off lights, checking locks, savoring the echo of music still hanging in the air. In the main recital hall, they paused, looking up at the mural of Clara, her painted eyes seeming to follow them with approving mischief. I wish she could have seen this, Isabel said softly. Elias took her hand. She did. She saw it before any of us. That's the thing about visionaries. They leave the blueprint. The rest of us just follow the notes. Outside, the city had quieted, stars appearing in the violet sky. They stood on the steps of the building that now bore Clara's name and vision, neither rushing to leave, to break the spell of completion. What now? Isabel asked, leaning against his shoulder. Elias considered. Now we begin again, every day. Just like music, it doesn't stay played. You have to keep creating it. She smiled. Is that a metaphor for something else? Maybe. Would you like it to be? She turned to face him. I'd like whatever comes next to be with you, however that sounds. He touched her face gently. I think it sounds like home. As they walked away from the building, hand in hand, neither looked back. They didn't need to. What they'd built would be waiting tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days to come. Not a monument to grief, but a living testament to what happens when broken things find their voice again. The music followed them down the street, not as sound now, but as possibility. Notes they'd leave behind for others to find, to play, to transform into their own melodies. An echo continuing long after the original sound had faded, rippling outward into a future neither could fully imagine, but both had helped create. The wind carried a single autumn leaf across their path. Elias caught it midair, gold and red and perfect in its imperfection. He tucked it into his pocket, a reminder that even falling things can be beautiful, that endings make room for beginnings, that what we lose shapes what we find. Isabel squeezed his hand and he squeezed back, both understanding without words that this moment, this journey, this shared creation was the real music they'd been searching for all along. Not perfect, not flawless, but honest and alive and continuing. Just like Clara had taught him, just like Eleanor had shown her, just like the notes they would leave behind.